chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. It follows allegations the Labour MP paid to have sex with 2 male prostitutes. Barack Obama and Theresa May have promised to maintain strong political and economic ties between Britain and the United States despite the Brexit vote. And thousands of mourners have attended the funerals of 5 friends who died on the beach at Canberra Sands, queuing from dawn to lay petals in their coffins. Well, now, politicians are returning to Westminster tomorrow, and no shortage of issues on their agenda, to say the least. Labour's chaotic leadership contest continues. Nicola Sturgeon has launched another drive for a second referendum on independence in Scotland. And, of course, there's the small matter of pulling the UK out of the European Union. Well, to discuss all that and more, I'm joined by Ed Miliband's former senior policy advisor and now chief leader writer with The Observer, Sonia Sodha, and the assistant editor of The Spectator, Isabel Hardman. Very good morning to you. But first, we want to go to the G20 summit in China. Theresa May is attending her first international summit there since becoming Prime Minister. Our own political editor, Faisal Islam, is following in her footsteps. And Faisal, is she making an impression out there?
Well, I'd say so. For a start, when we flew in, finally, British Prime Minister had a plane worthy of the nation to park up alongside the side of the runway, alongside the Air Force One and the Indians and the South Africans, all with their own planes. So that she didn't order that plane, of course. That was David Cameron, and he would have imagined that he'd be using that plane just a few months ago, but it wasn't to be because of that Brexit referendum. When she arrived here, it was intriguing to see everybody making a beeline for her, including after that sort of family photo that you get, massive at this G20 summit. So many people trying to fit in that photo. But afterwards, everyone going to see the newest Prime Minister on the block. I say newest, actually the Brazilian Prime Minister is marginally newer than Theresa May, but she does have quite a challenge. There's the intrigue of a new world leader, but a world leader with a mandate that she did not back herself in the EU referendum, but nonetheless one that she promises to deliver, which is obviously to take Britain out of the European Union. She had an interesting discussion with the President of the United States, Barack Obama. 15 minutes was spent talking about Brexit, but then other issues around security. Most interestingly, that famous question we ask of all protagonists to be our Prime Minister: what do you do when you face Vladimir Putin? She faced Vladimir Putin today for half an hour, downplaying Downing Street the notion that there's going to be some sort of reset with Russia. There were tough words exchanged over the Ukraine and over Syria, and Theresa May's team are making it clear that from their perspective, they want to cooperate with Russia where the cooperation is necessary, things like aviation security. But there are still very serious issues that Theresa May has with Russia, with Vladimir Putin. Remember, she was the Home Secretary that presented the investigation into the Litvinenko death, which was put in the hands of Russian state players, wasn't it? She's also met the Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. So she's playing on that world stage. It is her debut here. Brexit has perplexed some world leaders, some that fought the referendum campaign in some respects, or tried to lend a helping hand to David Cameron and ended up on the losing side. So an interesting moment, and if you like, after a honeymoon of a few weeks over the summer where her approval ratings have been very high, an introduction to some reality on world affairs and statesmanship too.
Yeah, but Faisal, I mean, isn't part of this introduction to reality? We've got the major trading nations in the world, Britain talking about, Theresa May talking about being open for business. But aren't they saying to her then, well, what does Brexit mean? Will our companies still want to invest in the United Kingdom because they want access to EU markets?
Yes, Barack Obama tellingly not going back 1 inch on that famous intervention into the referendum campaign. He didn't repeat the words back of the queue, but he certainly repeated the approach, which is, from the US perspective, as much as it's nice to talk about potential trade deals between the US and the UK, and they've begun to talk about in the round about what that might be, his priority is that the US does deals on a trans-European and trans-Pacific basis before the idea of a UK deal. But really intriguingly, I unearthed this document from Japan, which is an absolutely unprecedented intervention from our major investors. And I'll show it to you here. Japan's message to the United Kingdom and the European Union about Brexit. And this details in some vaguely blood-curdling detail about what Japanese businesses have been telling to the government. Japanese businesses have been very polite in the referendum campaign, not making too many threats, but they are concerned not about Brexit per se, but about the flavour of Brexit, about leaving the single market. The banks like this single market passport. The car manufacturers like the idea of all their parts being registered to the same standards across Europe. They run integrated supply chains across Europe. They're worried about leaving the single market, which seems to be the direction of travel of where the Brexit debate is going in the United Kingdom. The pharmaceutical companies, I didn't know about Japanese pharmaceutical companies. In this document, it suggests that pharma companies from Japan will leave if a European Medicines Agency was relocated, and surely it will be if we're out of the EU and this is the European Union's agency. There is a ton of detail in here. This is perhaps the most detailed technical analysis I have seen of the reality of leaving the single market, and it's been done by the Japanese government.
All right, Faisal, thanks for that. And nearly out of time there. Our political editor, Faisal Islam, well, let's talk to Sonia and Isabel about what flows from that. And Isabel, we're getting this statement, aren't we, later in the week from David Davis, the so-called Brexit minister, about what Brexit might look like, what they're going to ask for. Of course, Theresa May's going to be all over it as well. And it's that key issue still. How can you have access to the single market and restrict free movement? Do you think they can square that circle?
Well, it's a difficult one for them to square, and it was interesting listening to Theresa May trying to do that in her interviews this morning. I think that will certainly be the thing that Tory MPs are most interested in hearing. The Brexit means Brexit line is now no longer valid. It's something that people are mocking within Parliament and outside as well. And so David Davis does need to say a little bit more about what Brexit actually means, and to explain how you can have a strong trading relationship with European Union countries whilst also improving controls on immigration, which Theresa May has been very clear about. And given the net migration figures that came out a week or so ago were so bad in terms of the Tories' target to drive immigration down into the tens of thousands, this is something that Tory MPs and their voters are still very agitated about.
OK, Sonia, I mean, exactly that. It's just going to loom for so long, isn't it? Years to come. Single market, free movement.
I think that's right. That is the inherent trade-off. As I agree with Isabel, it's impossible in some ways to square that circle. I think Theresa May last week, she sort of made it very clear that bringing down immigration is a strong priority. And I think she gave the impression, for me, that she's going to be prioritising that over single market access. But I think, this statement from the Japanese government that Faisal was talking about, it illustrates perfectly the conundrum here. So, the Brexiteers have always argued, well, the answer for the vision for the British economy outside of the European Union is to develop other trading relationships with the rest of the world. Well, Japan's a really important trading partner, and look, it's telling us we need, Japanese companies in the UK need single market access. So I think that illustrates the very delicate line that Theresa May's got to tread here, and it's quite difficult to see how she sort of makes all these things square up. I don't envy her.
Okay, big structural issues there. Let's talk about the domestic agenda, and of course this NHS strike looming, or these strikes, and we're talking really serious stuff if they go ahead. 5 days in a row, times 4.
Well, I think it's a pretty extraordinary escalation from the BMA, actually. I mean, 20 days of strikes, including the withdrawal of emergency care in the run-up to Christmas. And I think one of the things that's most kind of bizarre about this whole situation is that the BMA sat down back in May, 8 days of intense negotiations with the government, and they produced a compromise contract, which the BMA told junior doctors was fair and safe. And now the BMA was left in a bit of a quandary because junior doctors rejected that contract in a vote. But for the BMA to escalate action in this way seems incredibly bizarre and completely out of proportion. So how do you think
her and Jeremy Hunt will play this then, Isabel? Do they detect an opportunity here to tough this out? I mean, an awful lot of support, of course, it goes without saying, for the junior doctors and the NHS.
Well, the BMA want to carry on doing this until they lose public opinion, basically, which is a risky game. But Jeremy Hunt has said to Cabinet colleagues in the past that to give in to the junior doctors doctors on this issue would to be encouraging other groups to behave badly.
But do they suspect they've overreached themselves here, given that what the way the BMA's had to change, before the ballot and after?
Well, I think it's the BMA trying to show that it has muscle, but there's a lot of junior doctors who I know who privately are very uncomfortable with what's happening because they feel it's a breaking of the contract between them and their patients, and they do worry that actually it's something that will turn the public against them. When they're hugely respected, rightly so, for the really hard work that they do, it looks more and more like a sort of a petty fight over money, which is really not why doctors go into that job.
I mean, Labour had Diane Abbott on saying, well, she's going to be on the picket line, concerns, of course, about damage to patients. But are there some in Labour who see this as, well, this is an industrial dispute and this is another form of political action, and this is the way things could help to change in the United Kingdom?
Well, I think there's obviously going to be a natural affinity, in terms of politicians on the left looking at kind of a profession that's striking, that's taking industrial action. But, for me, being someone who writes about politics on the centre-left, you have to take a step back and say, industrial action it's a really important right. The right to strike is critical, but for me it comes with responsibilities, and I think there's very clear evidence in this case that the BMA has not taken those responsibilities seriously. The fact that, it's changed its stance so drastically, it's created this drastic escalation of action. It hasn't balloted members on strike action since last November. The contract now on offer from government has changed immeasurably. So it's very difficult to see, I think, from a centre-left perspective even, how this strike action is justified.
And what of Labour, Isabel? I mean, even if, and it doesn't look like it, even if Jeremy Corbyn loses, given what we've heard from Owen Smith, does it look any more electable, whoever wins?
Now, I think Owen Smith has had a really disappointing leadership campaign, and lots of Labour MPs are sort of keeping quiet to try to support him, even though it looks, as you say, as though Jeremy Corbyn is going to win hands down yet again. But he's made some strange strategic errors, such as trying to out Corbyn on ISIS and issues like that, and the way in which he's tried to make himself as close to Corbyn on policy as possible, and then make this about competence while running a not particularly competent leadership campaign, is hugely disappointing for those who organised the coup and who started all the resignations from the front bench, which was a very well organised operation, but it seems to have flopped since, when it moved into a leadership campaign mode.
OK, and we heard from the Shadow Chancellor today, not about his twinkly toes, but about, is it all Ed Miliband's fault with the £3 membership?
I think it's very difficult to lay the blame at the door of one person, but there's absolutely no question that the reforms that were adopted around, increasing sort of the grassroots say in who's going to be Labour leader has had a massive impact. But it's interesting because those weren't reforms that were just pushed by Ed Miliband. They actually attracted very broad support from moderates in the party, from the left in the party. And I think it's actually because people just didn't really follow the consequences through and think about what that means in terms of, if you've got a Labour leader who's lost the support of 80% of his parliamentary party, but he has, such solid support amongst a growing membership, that's a really unsustainable, situation in a parliamentary democracy.
And last thought on that, Isabel, is there a chance? Theresa May's ruled it out again today, but she would say that even if she was going to hold one, a snap election.
Well, I think Tory MPs are pretty knackered at the moment after the past year that they've had, particularly newly elected Conservative MPs. So they're not particularly keen for an early election either, but what an opportunity it would be if Corbyn gets re-elected and Labour goes into complete chaos for...
But hold on, then presumably Labour gets rid of Jeremy Corbyn if he loses an election, although he said he won't go. Don't they want to keep him there? The Conservatives, I mean.
Yeah, I suspect there's some of that, although I would doubt that, that's what's really factoring into Theresa May's calculation, because I think even if Jeremy Corbyn did lose an election and was kicked off the sort of post, it would be a much smaller parliamentary Labour Party that we're talking about, and I think even with a new leader, they won't be sort of providing major problems for Theresa May. I'm quite interested in her decision. I think there are real risks actually not to having an early election for her. I think things are going to get much, much more difficult for her as time goes on with Brexit negotiations. I think the honeymoon's going to be over. So she's a very cautious person, we know that. She thinks we need stability, but I think there are actually risks of not going to the country early.
Well, we did get through a lot, but we didn't get to Scotland. We'll have to deal with that another time, but plenty to deal with there. Very good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed. And you're watching Moynihan on Sky.